Now, a new wave of genetic research has revealed something that rewrites everything we thought we knew about the Filipino people. For years, we believed the Philippines was simply a blend of Austronesian voyagers and later Asian influences. A neat, simple story. But the islands were never simple, not in their languages, not in their migrations, and certainly not in their DNA. Because recent genetic analysis has uncovered something scientists didn't expect at all. Hidden inside bones pulled from limestone caves, beneath volcanic soil and ancient coral ridges, are traces of peoples who shouldn't exist anymore. Ghost populations older than history. Distant echoes from Taiwan, from Indonesia, from the Himalayas, and even from a mysterious human species found nowhere else on Earth. Some of these genes do not appear in China, not in Indonesia, not even in other Pacific islands. They appear only in the Philippines. And they've survived untouched in remote mountains, cloud forests, and island communities where ancient bloodlines stayed sealed for thousands of years. This is a story of migrations that broke every rule, of humans who crossed impossible oceans, of tribes that vanished from the earth but not from the genome. So what makes Filipino DNA so strange? Why does it contain genetic signatures found nowhere else in Asia? And how did these islands become a crossroads of humans, so ancient that even modern science struggles to explain them? Long before kingdoms, tribes, or even the first boats, the Philippines was a world untouched by humans. A jungle fortress of giant monitor lizards, extinct rhinos, and the now vanished Philippine tiger. Then something incredible happened. The arrival of the first humans, 70,000 years ago. Archaeologists found tools on Luzon older than 65,000 years. And in 2019, the discovery of Homo luzonensis, a tiny human species with curved finger bones, shocked the world. They weren't Neanderthals, not Denisovans, not Homo sapiens. They were something else. These early humans lived, hunted, and evolved on Luzon. Their DNA doesn't survive today, but the fact they existed rewrites the entire human story, because it means the Philippines has one of the oldest human histories in Southeast Asia. A lineage that began before the first Austronesian canoe ever touched water. The ancient layer that survives today. But here's where the DNA becomes strange. The Philippines is home to dozens of groups whose ancestry traces back 40,000 to 50,000 years to the earliest modern humans in Southeast Asia. These include the Eta, Agta, Ati, Batak, Remontado, and other Negrito groups. Their DNA shows a mix no one expected. Deep East Asian roots, mysterious southern lineages, and something else, something scientists didn't recognize until recently. Filipinos, especially Negrito groups, carry some of the highest Denisovan DNA on Earth. Higher than most Indonesians, higher than mainland Asians, even higher than Polynesians. This means that long before boats or agriculture, long before the Austronesian expansion, the ancestors of Filipinos were already mixing with an extinct human species somewhere in island Southeast Asia. This deep, ancient layer survived, protected by mountains, jungles, and island isolation. But survival wasn't an accident. It was a battle waged over thousands of generations. Because while most ancient populations vanished under waves of migration, conquest, and cultural replacement, the early peoples of the Philippines did something extraordinary. They endured. In the dense rainforests of Luzon, in the shadowed mountains of Panay, along rivers that cut through Palawan like ancient scars, small communities lived in ways that barely changed for tens of thousands of years. And their DNA untouched, unbroken, carried memories older than any written language. To scientists, this was shocking, because when researchers sequenced the genomes of Aita, Agta, Ati, and Bata communities, they expected to find a simple story. Older Asian ancestry, later replaced or diluted by newcomers. Instead, they found the opposite. A lineage so deeply preserved it became a living fossil. These groups didn't just keep fragments of ancient DNA, they kept entire chapters of human history that had disappeared everywhere else. And buried inside those chapters was something even stranger. The Denisovans, mysterious cousins of humans discovered not through skeletons but through DNA fragments in a Siberian cave, left only faint traces across the world. Tibetans have a little. Some Indonesians have a little more. But in the Philippines, some groups carry the highest Denisovan DNA on the planet. To genetics researchers, this raised a question no one had asked before. Oh, why here? Why this archipelago and not Borneo, not Java, not mainland Asia? The answer is unsettling. It suggests that the ancestors of today's Negrito groups may have encountered Denisovans not just once, but repeatedly. Perhaps Denisovans lived somewhere in the islands. Or perhaps, in the deep past, they intermarried with the first modern humans who passed through this region, long before any Austronesian sailors set foot on a boat. Whatever happened, the Philippines became a reservoir of ancient genes. A place where the oldest layers of humanity were not erased, but woven into the identity of the people who live there today. Yet, this is only the beginning. Because the genetic map of the Philippines isn't just ancient, it's impossibly complex. After the first hunter-gatherers came waves of migrations we're only now discovering, and some of those later arrivals didn't just reshape the islands. They created one of the strangest genetic puzzles in Southeast Asia. Around 4,500 years ago, something changed. From the north came a people whose culture and technology would redefine the islands forever. The Austronesians. They weren't warriors. They were sailors, navigators, explorers. People who believed the sea wasn't a barrier but a highway. And their arrival is one of the great human stories. Genetics confirms that these voyagers originated near Taiwan, carrying new languages, agriculture, pottery, and boat-building techniques powerful enough to cross oceans. They sailed on the Balangay and its ancestors' boats with outriggers, flexible planks, and sails that could cut across currents and monsoon winds. When they reached the Philippines, they didn't replace the earlier people. They mixed with them. But here's a twist. Why Filipino Austronesian DNA is different. Filipinos don't just have Taiwanese ancestry. They have a uniquely blended version of it. Compared to Indonesians or Polynesians, Filipinos show more ancient hunter-gatherer DNA, more Denisovan ancestry, more genetic diversity overall, and numerous lost lineages found nowhere else in island Southeast Asia. That's not normal. It means the Philippines was not a simple stepping stone. It was a genetic crossroads, a mixing zone, a meeting point of worlds. For centuries, the ancient highlanders and lowlanders blended. Languages changed, cultures mixed, trade routes opened, pottery styles merged, myths and rituals fused. But ancient DNA? It survived especially in the mountains and remote coasts, where isolation protected older bloodlines. This blending gave rise to a uniquely Filipino genetic identity. Austronesian? Yes, but also deeply Eta, deeply Agta, deeply ancient, not erased, not overwritten, merged. The puzzle no one expected. As geneticists mapped the Filipino genome, they found something puzzling. Certain Filipino groups carried Austronesian ancestry that was older than the Austronesian ancestry in Indonesia or Malaysia. Older, even though the migration passed through the Philippines first. How is that possible? It means some Austronesian groups entered the Philippines, mixed with local peoples, then stayed. They didn't keep moving south. They didn't sail onto Polynesia. Some chose to call the islands home, creating branches of Austronesian DNA found only in the archipelago. This made the Philippines a genetic laboratory, where new mixes formed that never appeared anywhere else. Today, the Philippines has over 170 languages. Nearly all are Austronesian, but they're unusually diverse for such a small region. This is another sign of the enormous mixing that happened 4,000 years ago. When people blend genetically, their languages mix too. Loanwords, grammar shifts, shared myths. But in the Philippines, something stranger happened. New languages formed faster than in almost any other Austronesian region. Linguists call this explosive diversification, and it matches the DNA evidence perfectly. While lowland groups absorbed wave after wave of new arrivals, the highland peoples, Ifugao, Kalinga, Bontoc, and others, kept older forms of Austronesian genetics. Their isolation in mountain valleys prevented later migrations from overwhelming them. This is why many highland Filipinos today have older Austronesian ancestry, stronger signals of ancient local lineages, and cultural traditions that preserve echoes of early Austronesian life in their rice terraces, epics, and rituals, you can still feel the world of those first voyagers. The Austronesians brought crops that transformed the islands: rice, yams, taro, bananas, and sugarcane. These foods spread rapidly, and with them came new villages, trade networks, and population booms. And every time a new Austronesian settlement formed, it blended with the local hunter-gatherers nearby, adding another layer to the genetic mosaic. Most Austronesian migrations were linear: Taiwan to, Philippines to, Indonesia to, Pacific. But the Philippines was different. It wasn't a simple stop on the map. It was a cluster of 7,000 islands, each with its own micro-world. Different islands absorbed different mixtures. Luzon mixed Austronesians with ancient Highlanders. Visayas mixed with coastal Negrito groups. Mindanao mixed with multiple waves of Asian migrations. This created genetic mosaics so complex that some Filipino groups today carry ancestries seen nowhere else in the world. Redefine the archipelago. Austronesian farming caused population numbers to explode. Villages became towns. Trade routes linked island to island. The archipelago's population might have grown tenfold over a few thousand years. During this boom, Austronesians didn't simply spread their genes. They adapted to the islands, and the islands adapted to them. Lowlanders became the cultural hubs: traders, farmers, seafarers connecting island to island. Highlanders, meanwhile, preserved older layers of DNA and culture. They kept older rituals, older languages, older genetic signatures. This divide, coastal innovation versus highland preservation, is one of the keys to understanding Filipino genetics today. As researchers looked deeper, they found another mystery. Some Filipino groups carried Austronesian-related DNA that didn't match Taiwan, or Indonesia, or Polynesia, but something in between. A branch of Austronesian ancestry that split off, evolved in the Philippines, and stayed isolated for thousands of years. Scientists call these basal Philippine Austronesians. They're early Austronesians, frozen in time. These lineages are found almost nowhere else, and they turned the Philippines into a crucial missing chapter of the Austronesian expansion. By 2,000 years ago, the Philippines had become a genetic kaleidoscope. Ancient hunter-gatherers, early Austronesians, later Austronesians, and preserved highland populations, all intertwined in different ways on different islands. This is why Filipino DNA today varies wildly from province to province, sometimes even from town to town. And yet, across all this diversity, a pattern emerges. Filipinos aren't half this or a mix of that. They're the product of thousands of years of convergence. A genome shaped not by one migration, but by many, layered like geological strata, each one older, stranger, and more unexpected than the last. Because just when the genetic landscape seems complete, another migration appears on the horizon. A migration that didn't come from Taiwan or Luzon, but from the vast mainland of Asia. And this new arrival brought technologies, beliefs, and genetic threads that would tangle themselves into the Filipino genome forever. As kingdoms rose and fell, something else was happening quietly in the background. Something that would shape Filipino DNA for the next 1,000 years. Trade. Because every ship that arrived carried more than spices, porcelain, or gold. It also carried people. And people carried stories written directly into their genes. From the 900s to the 1400s, waves of Indian traders, priests, and scholars traveled across Southeast Asia, and the Philippine Islands were one of their stops. They came with Hindu-Buddhist ideas, new scripts, new trade goods, and sometimes new families. And today, Filipino DNA shows the marks: Indian ancestry, Pakistani ancestry, Sri Lankan ancestry, small percentages, yes, but undeniable. These influences helped shape early kingdoms like Tondo, Butuan, and Cebu, leaving traces not only in genetics but also in language, art, and early political systems. By the 1200s and 1300s, Islam was spreading rapidly across Southeast Asia. With it came travelers from Arabia, Persia, and the wider Indian Ocean world. Many were merchants, some were missionaries, and a few became part of local communities. In places like Mindanao and Sulu, some of these visitors married into ruling families. Their legacy lives on in Filipino DNA, especially in Y chromosome lineages, maternal mitochondrial lines, quiet fingerprints of ancient travelers who settled far from home. When Filipinos talk about Chinese ancestry, many think of the 1800s or the Spanish colonial period. But the story is much older. For more than 1,000 years before Spain arrived, traders from Fujian and Guangdong regularly crossed the sea to trade with coastal communities. They brought ceramics, silk, metalwork, and sometimes stayed long enough to start families. This early intermixing appears most strongly in coastal Luzon, parts of the Visayas, trade-oriented communities in Mindanao. So, Chinese Filipino ancestry isn't new, it's ancient. And then there's the surprising part, African DNA. In tiny percentages, yes, but real enough that scientists noticed it. Where did it come from? Probably from the Indian Ocean Trade Network, where African, Arab, and Asian sailors crossed paths constantly. Some may have arrived with Arab merchants. Others may trace back to Spanish colonial shipping routes, especially the era of the Manila galleons. But the exact sources? Still a mystery. One of the hidden threads in the Filipino genetic tapestry. The Philippines has over 100 ethno-linguistic groups, each with its own story, its own encounters, its own genetic fingerprint. Highland groups like the Ifugao, Kalinga, and Bontoc preserved older, more isolated DNA lines protected by mountains and tradition. Coastal groups like the Tausug, Samabajao, Maranao, Maguindanao, and Tagalog hold mixtures from centuries of trade, migration, and maritime exchange. These layers do not replace each other. They stack like sediments of history. The result, a tapestry, not a line. Filipino ancestry isn't a single timeline, it's a constellation, a mosaic. A story written by navigators, merchants, warriors, migrants, mountain farmers, island traders, and explorers who crossed oceans long before modern borders existed. Every Filipino today carries a piece of this ancient map, a blend of genes shaped by tides, trade winds, and human journeys. But trade was only the beginning, because soon, empires would arrive. Empires powerful enough to rewrite history textbooks, and strong enough to leave lasting marks on Filipino DNA. The first would come from the east, the next from the west. And between them, the islands would be reshaped completely. But before we get to that, we have to understand the political world that the Spanish sailed into. Because the Philippines was not an empty canvas. It had thriving kingdoms, sultanates, and trade ports. Tondo controlled the river routes of Manila. Butuan dominated the gold trade. Sulu ruled the southern seas. And Cebu held the central maritime crossroads. These weren't isolated kingdoms. They were deeply connected to empires like Majapahit, Indonesia, Srivijaya, Sumatra, China's Ming Dynasty, the Sultanate of Brunei. Through these networks, even more ancestry flowed in quietly, steadily. Javanese traders, Malay sailors, Cham migrants, even occasional Japanese merchants. All left tiny genetic traces, small percentages. But over centuries, small becomes visible. Unexpected ancestry. From the east, some Filipino DNA lines match groups from Taiwan's indigenous peoples, southern China's coastal tribes, and even ancient Pacific navigators who once connected Oceania. These links remind us that the Austronesian story didn't stop when people reached the Philippines. It kept flowing. By the 1500s, Filipino DNA was already incredibly complex. Austronesian at its core, Negrito at its roots, layered with Indian, Arab, Persian, Malay, Javanese, Chinese, African, and Pacific influences. This was the world the Spanish encountered, an archipelago alive with diversity. Not a blank page, but a book with 1,000 authors. And soon, another chapter would be written. One that would change religion, government, language, and yes, DNA. The stage is set, because after thousands of years of migration and mixing, a new wave was about to arrive across the horizon. A wave that would bring Europeans, Mexicans, Latin Americans, and even Africans into the Filipino genetic story. A wave called colonization, and it would leave marks still visible in Filipino DNA today. In 2021, a team of geneticists made a discovery that stunned the scientific world. They were studying Filipino DNA looking for known patterns. Austronesian markers? Yes. Negrito ancestry? Of course. Traces of Denisovan blood? Absolutely. Nothing surprising so far. But then, they found something else. Something no one expected. A genetic signature that didn't match anything known. Not Austronesian, not Negrito, not Denisovan, not Homo erectus, not any ancient human population previously recorded in Asia. It belonged to something different. A people who left no bones, no tools, no language, no trace in the archaeological record. Just a shadow in DNA. A ghost population. Something older, something forgotten, something that shouldn't exist but does. The ancient Philippine ghost. When researchers mapped this strange ancestry, only two explanations made sense. Either an extinct human species once lived in the Philippines, a species we have never discovered, or an extremely ancient migration reached the islands tens of thousands of years before the Austronesians, so early and so isolated that their descendants vanished everywhere, except in Filipino DNA. And here's what shocked the scientists most. This ghost ancestry is unique to Filipinos. Other Southeast Asian populations don't have it, or have it only in tiny, faded traces. But in the Philippines, it's clear, visible, undeniable, a missing chapter of human evolution hiding inside millions of living people. The discovery forced scientists to rethink everything. Who lived in the islands before the Negritos arrived? Were there unknown hominins traveling across Asia? Did early humans evolve differently in island environments? The answers are still unclear. But one thing is certain. Filipino DNA preserves a lineage that the rest of the world lost. Denisovan ancestry in Southeast Asians was already a surprise. But this ghost lineage might be even older. Older than the migrations that populated Australia. Older than the groups that spread across the Pacific. Possibly older than any known wave of modern humans entering Southeast Asia. It suggests that the Philippines was not just a stop along the human journey. It was a meeting point of multiple ancient populations. Some survived, some vanished. One left only genetic echoes. Where did they come from? Scientists have theories but no proof. Maybe they were relatives of the Homo luzonensis found on Luzon, tiny-bodied humans who lived 50,000 years ago. Or maybe they were an earlier species, one that arrived far earlier, lost in time and buried beneath the tropical soil where fossils rarely survive. Or maybe, and this is the most mysterious possibility, they were modern humans from a migration so ancient that it predates everything we thought we knew. Clues. Hidden in modern Filipinos. How do we know they lived? Because their DNA is still here. Not in one group, not in one island, but woven throughout multiple Filipino populations, especially in Lumad groups of Mindanao, highland peoples of Luzon, some Visayan communities, and isolated tribes across the archipelago. The ghost ancestry appears like a whisper, not loud but consistent, impossible to ignore. It's as if an entire people lived, loved, migrated, and disappeared. Yet somehow, their legacy survived through the genes of those who came after. They are gone, but not entirely. Their story continues inside the people alive today. This discovery rewrote the history books. Before 2021, scientists believed the Philippines was shaped by Negritos, Austronesians, later migrants, and a touch of Denisovan ancestry. A simple story. But the ghost population changed everything. It proved that the Philippines wasn't just a passive recipient of migrations, it was a crossroads of ancient humanity. A place where different species and lineages met and mixed, creating a genetic mosaic found nowhere else. What it means for Filipino identity. Filipino ancestry isn't just diverse, it's ancient, older than many civilizations, older than the Pacific migrations, possibly older than the first humans in Europe. It means that Filipinos carry genetic memories of a people lost to time, a lineage found nowhere else on Earth. Scientists still don't know who these ancient humans were. They don't know what they looked like. They don't know when they arrived or when they vanished. All we have is a trace, a silent witness to a forgotten world. But one thing is clear. To understand Filipino ancestry, you can't just look at known migrations. You must look at the people who left no footprints, no skeletons, no artifacts, except the ones written inside the human genome. And that is the strangest discovery of all, a missing ancestor, unknown, unnamed, unseen, yet living on in millions of Filipinos today. Then came the Spanish. Galleons, priests, soldiers, governors, sailors. 3 centuries of empire washing over more than 7,000 islands. And with empire came genes. Over 300 years, the archipelago absorbed multiple layers of outside ancestry. Spanish Iberian DNA from colonial administrators and settlers. Mexican DNA carried by sailors, merchants, and soldiers from New Spain. Latin American lineages from Peru, Colombia, and Central America. African ancestry arriving indirectly through Spanish colonies like Mexico, Cuba, and Peru. This wasn't a single wave. It was centuries of slow, steady contact, one of the longest-running cross-Pacific connections in human history. And after Spain came the Americans. A new power, a new era, and with it, new genetic threads. Small but detectable European-American ancestry, scattered traces of African-American DNA, and minor influences from US military presence during the 20th century. These additions reshaped culture, politics, language, but genetically, they did far less than people assume. Despite everything, 3,000 years of migrations, centuries of trade, 300 years of Spanish rule, 50 years of American rule, waves of Chinese merchants, Islamic traders, Indian priests, and inter-island mixing. Most Filipinos today still carry more ancient Southeast Asian and Denisovan ancestry than almost any population on Earth. Higher than Malaysians, higher than Indonesians, higher than Polynesians, higher than mainland Asians. The deep genetic roots, the first islanders, the early hunter-gatherers, the mysterious Denisovan-infused populations, they didn't disappear. They held on. Why? Because the Philippines is an archipelago of isolation. Mountains, jungles, seas. Geography acts like a shield. New arrivals settled mainly in coastal towns, cities, and trade hubs. But inland villages, highland communities, and remote islands kept their ancient DNA almost untouched. The Aita of Luzon, the Agta of Sierra Madre, the ATI of Panay, the Batak of Palawan, indigenous Lumad groups in Mindanao. These communities carried the oldest layers forward, preserving ancestry that vanished elsewhere. Even in lowland Filipinos, the Tagalog, Ilocano, Cebuano, Kapampangan, Waray, Tausug, Bicolano, the ancient signal remained strong. The Austronesian Taiwanese influence is there, the Spanish influence is there, the Chinese influence is there, but they sit on top of something deeper, far deeper. A genetic foundation older than kingdoms, older than agriculture, older than the Pacific voyages, older than recorded history itself. This is the real secret of the Filipino genome. Despite waves of colonizers, merchants, explorers, and empires, the deepest Filipino roots didn't just survive, they dominate. Anthropologists call this genetic persistence, when ancient ancestry remains strong despite later arrivals. The Philippines is one of the strongest examples on Earth, because unlike in the Americas, where European colonization replaced huge amounts of native DNA, unlike Polynesia, where long-distance migrations reshaped ancestry, unlike mainland Asia, where millennia of empires mixed entire populations, the Philippines kept its core. Today, the average Filipino genome still carries ancient Southeast Asian hunter-gatherer blood, some of the highest Denisovan ancestry on the planet, unique ghost lineage ancestry, early Austronesian heritage, and only modest layers of Chinese, South Asian, Spanish, and American influence, a genetic time capsule, updated but never overwritten. Colonization changed culture, religion, languages, cities, and politics. But the DNA is stubborn, old, resilient, still echoing with the footsteps of the first islanders, because the core of the Filipino genome, the ancient, the mysterious, the island carved, survived everything. Today, Filipino DNA travels farther than the Austronesian voyagers ever dreamed. It lives in cities and suburbs, deserts and mountains, from polar cold to tropical heat. You can find Filipino ancestry in the The United States, now home to one of the largest Filipino populations on Earth. Canada, where entire communities trace their roots to Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. The Middle East, where overseas workers quietly carried their lineages into the next generation. Europe, from London to Rome to Madrid. Oceania, especially Australia and New Zealand, and of course, across every island nation linked by Austronesian migration from Guam to Hawaii to Samoa. The Filipino genome has become one of the most widespread on the planet. And what's fascinating is how precise it remains. Modern genetics can now trace a Filipino's ancestry back to incredibly specific places. A DNA sample can reveal whether someone's roots lie among Cordillera Highlanders, Ifugao, Kenkanai, Bontoc, Ibaloy, Visayan Lowlanders, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, Waray, Mindanao Sultanates Maranao, Maguindanao, Tausug, Yakan, Aeta, or Acta groups among the oldest lineages in Southeast Asia. The Ivatan of Batan is isolated, ocean-hardened, genetically distinct. Tagalog regions with a unique blend of ancient and Austronesian ancestry, the Sama Bajau, the legendary sea nomads carriers of maritime genetic signatures found almost nowhere else. Each region, each group, each island carries patterns so sharp they survive across oceans, unchanged, like genetic fingerprints written in stone. And here's the most surprising part. After all the migrations, all the diaspora waves, all the intermarriages across continents, the Filipino genome is not diluted. It is not fading. It is not disappearing into larger populations, whether in Los Angeles or Dubai, Toronto or London, Sydney or Doha. Filipino DNA remains unmistakable. Ancient Southeast Asian, deeply Austronesian, marked by Denisovan echoes, carrying ghost lineages older than history itself. The Filipino genome is not lost. It is traveling the world, carrying 50,000 years of memory in every cell, every heartbeat, every breath.